Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our fourth episode of Releasing Shame is Your Superpower. And today we want to talk about the shame around suicide, releasing the shame around suicide. And shame is a huge part. It's actually a crisis in this world that we live in, as we're witnessing that it has become the leading cause of death in men and boys from the age of 15 to 24. That statistic was already true in some countries. Some, it's come into that during this period of isolation with the virus and everything that's been going on. And even before that, in a lot of Western countries, suicide was the second leading cause of suicide in that age group.
Suicide, death.
Of death. Pardon me. The second leading cause of death after accidents. And so even before, it was a huge problem and public health issue, and really a crisis of humanity because of everything that's going on. And this is societies where dominator culture has been a way of life for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so as we delve into the agonizing whys, because when suicide happens, those who are left behind are always going into the why. And as a society, we need to look at this. It's a deep pain. We've become aware that shame is a huge contributing factor to both those who choose the path of suicide, as well as those of us who live with the pain of having lost a loved one in this way. And for those of you who may not be aware, I recently lost my son 5 days before his 21st birthday to suicide. And so this is something I've been taking deeper and reflecting on. And it's something we need to address as a culture and shift what's going on in the world and in our culture that's creating the world not being a place where our youth can be authentically expressed and feel like that they are worthwhile, and that this life is a beautiful place to be and to live in. And we have to heal the root cause of that pain if they're going to have the safety and connection that they need to thrive and to live. So we're happy to have Kelly Love joining us for this really vulnerable conversation. And tell us a little bit more about you, Kelly.
Thank you, Freya. So I'm Kelly Love, and I met Michael and Freya a little over a year ago. I booked my own healing retreat with them and continued a deep dive on my healing journey. And since then, we've been able to experience partnership in a number of ways. And this week, we really wanted to highlight suicide. It's very real. It's something that's touched my family. Several members of my family have contemplated and attempted it and come really close. And obviously, Freya has also lost her son. Transition might be a better word. He's transitioned. And so it's our heart to really dive into maybe some of the more untalked, taboo aspects of suicide to help people understand why this is even a choice for some people, and to meet it with understanding, love, and compassion. So today we want to give voice to those who have experienced suicide, either attempted it or lost a loved one. This is for you.
Yes, and we just had somebody comment on the Facebook Live that they lost their father to suicide in 2006. So this is a very real issue for many people. So many people's lives are touched by different aspects of suicide, either having lost a loved one or having attempted suicide themselves or having felt suicidal. And uh, often shame of these various aspects uh, is often at the root of why people or someone might want to leave the planet. Self-loathing becomes so deep that they feel that the world would be better off without them, or that they'll never be accepted as a quote productive and valuable member of society uh, for who they are, because they have their own self-judgments based on what they were communicated to or taught in varying ways, either by family or society or religion, or all of these different ways that we have these beliefs that are formed around ourselves, often in early childhood, that they're a good person, or that they have value, or that they're just maybe even just experiencing the pain of this world, and they're feeling everyone's pain and their own pain, and they have no hope that that can ever change. And they choose to not live in that pain anymore. And, you know, there's so many judgments around suicide, and even feeling suicidal, feeling thoughts of wanting to leave the planet. Uh, there's shame around that. It's labeled mental illness. And yes, people with mental illness can also feel suicidal. And there are so many of us, myself included, at some point in our lives have felt like that living in this place and feeling hopeless that what we're experiencing will ever change, we may feel suicidal. And I have felt that before. And at the time, the only thing tethering me to this planet was my children. So I've felt that. And I was a mother. I was a registered nurse at the time. And so I'm seeing all of these things, these red flags, and I'm the health professional, and I'm the mother, and I'm the one taking care of everyone else. And seeing this in myself was fucking terrifying. And did I tell anyone? No. Of course I didn't. There's shame around that. There's a label. If you're feeling suicidal, there's something wrong with you. And so how many of us actually dare to share because of the taboo and the judgments around suicide, actually will reach out for help when we need it, right? You have something to add to that, Kelly or Mika? I can't hear you, Kelly. You've disappeared.
I wanted to just speak into one of the shame pieces behind suicide. Growing up in my family and in the conservative religion that I was raised in, suicide was seen as taking judgment into our own hands, and therefore a quote unquote sin. And I appreciate the insight that you're bringing, Freya, because this isn't necessarily a judgment on what is right or what is wrong or what's fixable or what is not fixable. It's a very real reality for people who life becomes so overwhelming that the thought of carrying on any further just seems impossible. And so this is why we want to try to remove some of the shame around it, because this isn't a judgment of right or wrong. This is explaining why we're here and how we can meet it with love and compassion.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and like you said, again, one of the judgments around suicide that is brought to us by religion is that suicide is a sin, and one of the most grievous sins, and that that person is going to hell. I've heard that said. That was the religion that I came from. And so, really, truly, honestly, they're in their own personal hell already. Suicide is a sin, and one of the most grievous. So it's interesting how we take the fear of hell and use that as a way of controlling and manipulating in religion. And it's actually creating that state in this life that we're experiencing. And so the person that's in that experience and experiencing that state of inner turmoil and hell and pain, they feel like they have nowhere to go and nowhere that they can actually speak to someone and share how they're feeling with, because they'll be judged. And the shame is intense. So how can we bring light to this? How can we and also in some cases where suicide is often, it can be a conscious decision to end suffering in a case of a terminal illness, where they feel like that there's so much pain that they just can't live in it anymore. And that can include mental pain. And so, where do we go? How do we remove the taboo around something that we don't even talk about? We don't talk about it publicly. And we need to educate our young people, because it's this age group of 15 to 24 that's the highest risk, especially in boys, but girls as well, for suicide. And we're not even educating them, and we're not even telling them that this happens, and speaking to it in a way where they feel like they can share their experience, and they can share their feelings in a way that they're not going to be shamed and judged. So they really often feel like they have nowhere to go, and they try to carry it on their own, and it becomes too heavy to carry anymore. And do you have something to add to that, Mika?
I did want to say that I'm over here sort of being the technical person for this today. Kelly is having some technical difficulties. She just texted me and see if she gets that resolved. But yeah, no, this is, again, has been a very recent experience for us. It's really brought it home and caused us to give a lot of, give a lot of thought to it, and seek to provide some guidance, comfort to others.
Yes. And we've mostly talked about the shame and how it affects the person who is feeling suicidal, people who do make that decision, that choice. And in reality, the people who are left behind also suffer because of this element of shame that has been placed on suicide. And right to the point of, not wanting people to know that this is how their loved one died, or not wanting to speak about it, or not daring to speak to each other about it, or wanting to put blame on some outside person or situation, or feeling guilt and shame around how could I have done something different that would make my loved one not have made that choice. And we all look at those things. We all look at the what ifs and the resulting shame that comes from those things. If we're not taught how to deal with the emotions and to process and move through, people can get stuck in the shame, and which is not useful at all. Because the only time that shame and guilt is useful is when you are actually using that to say, how can I shift things? So yes, what is useful is how can we change how we're showing up, or how people around us are being supported and perceived and talked to. Are we talking about this very real issue? Are we addressing suicide with our young people in our families, young people in school, all of this needs to be addressed and talked about, and have the taboo and the shame removed from it. There's so much turmoil going on. It's in groups of people that have lived within this dominator culture of, you have to show up a certain way to be seen, and like we're seeing it in young men so much, you have to show up in this way to actually be masculine, to be productive, to be of value, to have any kind of self-esteem. And
Bria, may I pause really quick and ask you to explain to the audience what dominator culture means for those that aren't aware?
Dominator culture is what we see as patriarchy. Most people refer to it as the patriarchy, which has this kind of chain of value where white men are seen as the highest value and the highest power and the controlling influence. And it's not even just men, but it puts men in a very, very difficult situation. And the judgment is that it's taken away this communal and tribal way of being where people are supported. And now men have to show up in a way where they can do it all themselves. They can support their family. They can do all of these things. They're strong. They have to have this false sense of masculinity. They can't show physical affection to each other, because then you get into the homophobia. So anything that is the feminine energy is suppressed. And so there's this impossible standard of masculinity and value that is put upon people, and it's affecting everyone, including those men who appear to have the most advantage and privilege, and they do, but at the same time they're also being harmed by this in a very, very deep level. The wounding is incredibly intense.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's harming everyone to be in this way of being, where domination and control of other people is combined with a false standard of what is enough as far as masculinity and what it means to be a man in this culture. And we're seeing it also showing up because those who are victims of dominator culture, which is oppressed groups, which is like women, which is people of color, which is Black people, which is people who have disabilities, because all of patriarchy requires an oppressed group to exist. And so we're seeing again suicide in teens of Black people, teen people in the Black community. Suicide is also way higher in that group, and that's oppressed people. And it's not, again, as I say, not even just the oppressed groups that this is showing up in, because it's huge in white men and boys. So we have to look at things differently.
Yes.
I heard a very succinct definition of patriarchy. It's basically a gender binary, very powerful, strong gender binary. Everything is either female or male, either masculine or feminine. There's no in between, there's no spectrum. And then also combined with a hierarchy. And the hierarchy always puts the masculine on the top in the patriarchy.
So essentially, I want to repeat back what I hear about dominator culture in a succinct way. So what I'm hearing about dominator culture is it is about domination and control, whether it's of a nature or a people or a society, versus empowering people to utilize their power, to control their power.
Yes, it's power over instead of power with.
It's how you use your power. You use your power to overcome, or to use your power to create partnerships and to grow and to build. It also, dominator culture is also enshrines the ability to destroy and kill. Where a
Which
partnership
is so opposite of the feminine, which is to bring life. Like literally we partner in bringing life with our bodies.
And they have what they, the sort of the altar of that is the partnership culture, which is where what is most revered is the ability to create, like you said, the ability to create life, to grow, for fertility, to build rather than destroy.
So when you have a situation of dominator culture over generations and generations, that the trauma that is experienced by one generation gets passed on to the next and to the next and to the next. And you have the oppressed groups who are being dominated and killed and enslaved. And so you have that trauma, and then you have the trauma of those who are the dominators, who are literally repressing and vilifying that very feminine nature within themselves, and like tearing away a piece of themselves. And if anybody feels like that there is not trauma that's inflicted upon the psyche and soul of a person who is killing other people, when we know the truth is that we are all connected, you're literally shredding your own soul to do those acts. So it's going to catch up with us at some point, and we're seeing that now in these.
It is catching up, yeah.
Is these suicides, and the way that the whole planet is suffering, and like we're seeing the extinction of so many species on this planet due to dominator culture and not honoring the feminine and the planet. And so literally we're on a path of self-destruction. And if we continue on the path of dominator culture, dominating and repressing, when one group of people is used up, the dominator culture moves on to the next group and the next group and the next group. And so we're literally on a path of self-extinction if we continue on this path. And I feel that if we can address what is creating this increase in suicide, the suicide within our own people, this desire to leave a planet that is so out of alignment with our soul's expression that we don't want to live here anymore. If we can address this effectively and create that safe place for our youth to be expressed fully and accepted and valued and honored in that full expression, then we're actually going to shift that trajectory of where we're headed as a species on this planet. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I want to lean into that a little bit about what is it that we are able to do with the youth and even people who aren't youth, everyone. What are we able to do with people present today to empower them to feel comfortable with who they are and expressing themselves in this world? One of the things you and I talked about was one of the major causes of suicide is what people have termed mental illness. And one of the things that the three of us agree on is that most, if not all, mental illnesses, which I don't even like that word because it assumes there's something wrong with the brain, and I don't believe that there's something wrong with our brain. The root of many mental illnesses, or chemical imbalances, as I would like to call them in the brain, is pain and trauma and these dense emotions that don't have a space to be expressed.
Yes.
And in relation to your son and your situation, where would you say that this fits in?
I would say this fits in right from the time that children are very small, in giving them like in not shaming them for their expression. My son had a huge soul. He had big emotions, loud expression. He's fire energy. And in the kind of culture that I grew up in, this was not acceptable. They were to be submissive and quiet and obedient. And he was the kind of big expression that would challenge authority, and that would, just be loud, and that could be obnoxious. And in the kind of family that was, which was like a huge polygamous religious family, then his expression was not tolerated. It was not tolerated in a loving way with most of the people there. There were a few. I did my best to protect him, but it wasn't enough. And of course, I've wondered, if I'd left sooner, would that have changed things for him? Would he have felt like he had value? It's like even up to, the last couple of years, I've seen, and one of my daughters expressed having seen him coming into a large family gathering, and every person he interacted with had something to say about what he was wearing, or how his hair was a mess, or this or that. And when he approached her and she just hugged him and said, "It sure is good to see you," he just like almost crumpled and said, "Thank you," and just that appreciation for being appreciated in his expression was huge for him in that moment. But when you get more of the other than you do of the acceptance and the love, then it creates, and I'm not saying that even in this last couple of years that could have changed. It may not have changed his decision. It may have stemmed mostly from when he was young, but it all affects everything. How we're perceived, and we see people perceiving us, absolutely affects how we feel. And when our expression, when we're told that our emotions are too much, and we're told that only certain emotions are acceptable, and then only a certain amount of those emotions are acceptable. Even in our grief, we're told only a certain amount of sadness is acceptable, and only for a certain amount of time. And then shamed for anything more than that. And shamed for maybe even, you've got, "Oh, well, she's not handling that very well, is she? Somebody should sedate her." Or, "Wow, she's looking really good. She must not have cared that much, because she sure got over it quickly on those good days." Or if you're good at hiding the pain. So there's so much judgment. And so then people judge themselves. Like, I shouldn't allow myself to feel joy because, I just lost my son 2 months ago. And how dare I feel joy? How dare I have any kind of glow about me? And this is because of outside shame being heaped upon us. And we're taught this shame from the time we're very young. So when people have depression, most of the time, that depression is because we have pressed down, depressed those emotions, the anger, the sadness, all of that stuff that we're told is unacceptable about ourselves. And often we're not even allowing ourselves to even consider that we even have a right to feel anger or sadness or rage about things that have happened to us in our past, and or what's even happening to us in our current experience. And so we stuff it down. We continue to dissociate that from ourselves, to repress it, and then it begins to burst out in ways that are dysfunctional, that maybe we feel suicidal because there's nowhere to go that we can actually be fully expressed and say how we feel. So again, then that comes out as mental illness, and we get labeled, and there's shame around that. So That's where it comes out for me.
Thank you for sharing that. And for those that might say suicide is selfish, or suicide is the easy way out, or suicide is for lazy people, or suicide is a sin, what do you want to say to those people who hold those views?
Fuck you.
Why? Why?
Because
Fuck you and thank you. Next.
Yes, next, moving on, because it's a lie, and it's keeping us trapped in this place of hopelessness and lying about how we feel, and not having anywhere we can go when we feel those ways, that we feel like we can go and not be judged and not be told not to feel that way. And we're living our lives trapped in a place of having to live them based on other people's comfort or discomfort and feeling our emotion, right? So that's the thing, is when somebody is saying somebody should sedate her, she's not handling it very well, it's because her emotion, or his, is bringing up discomfort, because it's forcing the other person to actually feel something, and it's uncomfortable, and they don't want to feel that, because again, it's our own self-perception of what's acceptable and what's right. And we've been given so much shame around the emotions, the expression of emotion, that people are completely numbed out and living life from a place of literally being the walking dead. And when something so intense comes through that it's literally forcing us to feel anything outside what we've been taught is socially acceptable, then we don't want to. And so we want to shut down what that other person is feeling, so then we can go back to our place of being comfortable. And that's what's killing us.
Yeah, and I would say even the name calling of lazy and selfish and things like that to people who have chosen to end their life is probably taking a position of really not understanding all that goes into somebody even contemplating suicide. Just from speaking with family, from my own experience of family members who have tried to commit suicide, a lot of effort was put into trying to heal and create peace and resolve issues, express emotions. And unfortunately, there was just so much chaos growing up in our home, and we didn't have a lot of tools to be able to effectively process these emotions, nor did we have the support and resources like on a practical level. And so for people who are contemplating suicide, sometimes this is the only relief. It's not a lazy option. It's, oh my fucking God, I have exhausted everything and nothing is working, and I don't want to keep living in this reality.
Yeah. And
that's not lazy. Yes, exactly. They feel hopeless in the moment.
And what I'm going to put out there is that these people who have chosen the path of suicide, they finally chose that because they had that inner battle around that. That's not the first time they've thought of it. It's probably the 100th or 1000th time they've thought about it. And they have won that battle against that thought every damn time until that point. And finally they're at this place because they've struggled with it for hundreds, if not thousands of times. They're warriors. They have fought that.
I would agree with that. The warrior piece. And I just want to give a little, actually, carry on. It's not important.
But they've won that battle, that struggle.
So many times.
So many times. And then somebody takes a look at they finally chose out of continuing to live in that place where they're suffering all the time. And then they're saying that that was selfish. It's very rare that somebody chooses suicide as a way of trying to hurt other people. Often they're very aware that it's going to hurt other people, and that's why they have struggled against it hundreds, if not thousands of times before, and now they finally see no other option, because living life in that inner state all the time is no longer acceptable for them. And it's actually you know, their soul saying, you know, I can't do it anymore. I can't be in this place where I can't even be me. Or where I don't even know who me is, because I've been handed this set of ways of being that I can't even do it. I can't. So the selfish, no, it's not a selfish act, and they have fought that battle many, many, many times. It's not lazy.
I would even suggest that if somebody in your life has committed suicide, I would take some time to reflect on what's going on in the environment.
Yes.
Because
change this.
Exactly, how to change it, because
to make their sacrifice mean something.
Yeah. And to prevent it, because we don't wake up and say, oh, I think today I'm going to kill myself. That sounds like a great idea. Thoughts like this don't just manifest. Like, there is a lot going on in somebody's life that brings up an emotion. And this is something that we talk about a lot, how emotions are like these signposts that tell us, hey, something's here. Look this way, you know? And so instead of looking at the suicide as something that should be demonized or criminalized, just trying to combine two words right there. Let's look at it as a sign of, hey, something is out of alignment here. And what am I able to do to shift this environment and bring alignment? For each person in my family that attempted suicide, I could point to at least 50 things that contributed to these overwhelming thoughts of wanting to make the choice of ending a life. And so this is why we're talking about it, because Freya's son didn't wake up 5 days before his 21st birthday wanting to kill himself, to exact vengeance or one up God or anything. Life was overwhelming. And what are we able to do as a community of people to help shoulder this and usher each other into healing? And it's a point of reflection as well, because we talk about this every week. We learn about ourselves because of what has been mirrored to us. So if what is being mirrored to us is you're too much, you're not enough, you need to be different, you this, you that, change this, change that, then at some point, if the messages are always contrary to how we actually want to live, it's like, okay, well, do I live like this, or do I live to try to please everybody else? And if we're living to please everybody else, yes, we're going to have this internal schism that is going to cause a lot of emotional upheaval and eventually manifest in ways that are painful, like suicide.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So we want to do you mind if I shift a little bit and move into what is helpful for those who are grieving?
Well, I'd like to start out with what is not helpful.
Even better. Let's do that.
Pity is not helpful.
Can you explain pity versus compassion or understanding?
Pity, again, is going to be shame-based. Oh, that poor person, their son committed suicide, and still holding that shame around it and judgment around it. Compassion can be as simple as, I have no words. Do what you must be feeling. And offer a hug. Platitudes, useless platitudes of, well, he's in a better place now. He's happy now. What's a better place than, there's this whole thing that comes up with any death. What's a better place than being with his family that loved him?
And regardless of whether or not he's in a better place, it does nothing to address the pain of loss. So
exactly.
It's really dismissive.
Yes. And, we can simultaneously understand that wherever a person is, once they've passed on, regardless of why or how they died, that yes, their soul is totally okay. Their soul is okay. And we can grieve the loss of their physical presence with us.
Mm-hmm.
Grieving is healthy when we're allowed to move through it in a way that honors how we feel. And we can simultaneously acknowledge that their soul is okay. And maybe that it's even connecting with us at some level and communicating with us, as well as honor that we deeply grieve the loss of their physical presence with us. Then there's the blaming and shaming. Didn't you see that coming? What could you have done differently? How could you have not seen that coming? Didn't anybody do something to help? Of course we fucking did stuff to help, right? Yes. Or maybe they were one of those people who, like Robin Williams, was so good at trying to make everybody else happy and everybody else comfortable and putting on that fake smile that nobody saw it coming. There's so many possibilities of what could have been going on, and the blaming and shaming does not help, and it's just creating more pain and more harm.
That almost feels like scapegoating too.
Mm-hmm. Well, the person grieving is spending a lot of time fighting those questions within themselves.
Already,
too.
Yes, they're already looking at the what ifs and the what could I have done differently, and
yeah, and hindsight is always 20/20.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't live in a state of beating ourselves up and living in what ifs and could haves and should haves. It's also when people say, oh, couldn't you see it coming? Well, if we're all taught to be these amazing actors and hide our emotions, maybe we didn't see it coming. And what does that say about our society? If we cannot sense that someone is in emotional upheaval, emotional pain, because we've all been taught to be good actors and just stuff it down, and that's not acceptable, that's not pretty.
Yeah.
Then it is a challenge to anticipate all the needs.
Or even if you do see that someone's suffering and they're in pain, and you do the best that you can to make them feel loved, and they're in such a place that they're not even in a place that they can receive that love because their subconscious belief about themselves won't allow it, won't allow the receiving of that love. Or there's mixed messages that are going on, or whatever. It's to put that on someone whose loved one is dead, and that there's nothing that's going to be changed by that.
Right.
It's not helpful, and it's harmful. It's re-traumatizing.
Mm-hmm. What about this one? At least he's not suffering anymore.
Yeah, there's that one. And that does not take away from the pain of having lost that loved one.
Yeah.
Not one bit is not helpful. And then there's the saying I understand when they have no fucking clue.
And let's lean into that, Freya, because when we say I understand, it means I have a working, intimate interaction with this, meaning I have lost a son that killed himself.
Yeah.
So for anyone to say I understand, it means you have actually gone through something like that.
Yeah.
So it's really something that only should be said when you've actually experienced it. And even then, every person is so unique that, yeah, you can have glimpses of understanding, but the human experience is so nuanced with each person. Your understanding is going to be limited no matter what.
Yeah.
It's very
And
presumptuous.
it is very presumptuous, and it's false, and it's a lie. And you know, if they're telling that lie, what else? You know, it makes it so you can't trust the intentions of the person. And it just comes up. It's like, no, you don't. This is what you feel like. No, you don't.
Yeah.
And I felt like I had a friend here in Costa Rica who, when she saw me, she said, I know what it's like to have lost a son, but I still know that I can't comprehend what it's like to have lost a son to suicide. You know, she was acknowledging that even though she'd lost her son at around that age, she still didn't know. And that felt so real and so genuine. It was beautiful. And then there's the people who make it about them.
What does that look like for you?
Well, it's I haven't had a lot of this coming up for me, but I know a lot of people experience this, and they're putting their pain on the person who just lost the family member and wanting them to make them feel better. And it's made about their emotions. And when you're in that place of intense emotion yourself, that grief, that loss, you don't have the energy to make other people feel better about what happened. Right?
Right.
Unless it's somebody who's as deeply affected.
Unless it's somebody who is as deeply affected by it as you, then you come together and you hold each other.
Yeah.
Like my children with me, you know, they supported me, I supported them. It was like this beautiful coming together. But somebody who's, you know, a little further removed and they want you, like even a parent, like a grandparent trying to have their child who just went through this. And I know you can speak to having to carry the emotions of other family members when you lost your daughter. You know, as an infant, it was a different situation, but still, it's that carrying of other people's emotions, regardless of how the loss happened, right? We can't do that.
You don't have the emotional bandwidth.
Yeah.
And for somebody who has lost somebody, it's a traumatic experience. And so to give some insight into people about what happens when we're in this trauma response, in this grieving process, part of it is our rational brain is not fully online. The neocortex is not fully online.
Yeah.
And so trying to put your needs on somebody else or trying to get something out of them that they're like physically, literally able not to give makes no sense. So it makes sense for people who are a little bit more removed from the situation to reach out to them for emotional, physical, practical support rather than reaching out to the person who is going through the loss. They're working on survival. Their body is in survival mode, self-care mode. And the last thing that anyone needs is more placed on them, more expectations placed on them.
Yes. And, you know, it's not about when you're interacting with someone who's directly experienced a loss, it's not about you. And so if you can't be there in a loving, supportive way, don't be there at all. It would be much more helpful.
Yeah. And then there's also, I want to lean into like how it can be overwhelming at times to even receive all the beautiful messages and requests to come spend time with whoever is going through the loss. Like those things are beautiful. And at the same time, for somebody who is grieving, it could feel like caretaking, which is more energy. And so even being cognizant of how you show up to somebody who's going through a loss like this, cognizant of making your offer known, so that way, or your offer understood, so that way the person who's receiving that can feel like, okay, I can receive. I don't have to give anything right now. Yes, this feels good.
Yes, exactly. So now moving into what actually is helpful, and based on that thing that you just said, sometimes when we're at a loss to know how we can show up, just actually ask the person, what would feel supportive for you right now? How can I support you? What would feel good to you? What would that look like? And letting them tell you, if you don't know yourself, if you're not aware. Like I said before, acknowledging that it's beyond your comprehension and just hold them. Feel emotion with them in a compassionate way, not in a way that, again, they have to comfort you. Right?
Yeah, and let's lean into that a little bit more too, because there's a fine line between compassion and pity. And compassion can look like, I'm feeling that heaviness, and I'm not sure with you, and I'm not sure what to do with this or how to hold you right now. I want you to understand I'm here with you. That feels very compassionate. Pity can be like, oh, yeah, that really sucks. Do you feel the energetic difference where it's leading with the heart, feeling with the heart forward, versus, oh, that's too bad. You're not in it with them. You're not feeling it with them.
Yeah. One feels fake and the other feels real. And another thing that goes along with that, like just putting your arms around someone and holding them, and allowing them to feel and to express their emotion, and just allowing it. Don't tell them not to cry.
And I would even say, if you're not in a space to handle dense emotions, don't go. Do not show up. Exactly. Because it is more damaging to express a powerful emotion and be met with, ooh, I can't handle that, than to not be met at all. Experiencing the loss of somebody, experiencing any kind of trauma it's a very isolating experience in and of itself. And we've talked a lot about why, because of dominator culture and emotions being shamed and repressed and things like that. So it is already a challenge to show up with emotions, and then to have those strong emotions met with resistance is actually quite damaging. So if you
Yes.
can't hold the space, don't show up.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Exactly.
not only don't say don't cry, but also what doesn't work is to say it's okay.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, like, experiencing these dense emotions, the person who's expressing them, and I'll speak from personal experience of losing my daughter. It wasn't to suicide. I just wanted to be seen and held
Mhm.
and accepted for the state that I was in. I didn't want to be fixed. I didn't want a platitude. I don't want your solution. I just wanted to be witnessed and held and understand that I'm not alone in this. Like, there are people linking arms with me and holding me up when I feel like I just want to collapse. This is the kind of support people need when they lose someone they love, especially when it comes to suicide.
Yes. Yes. And I wasn't able to physically be there when my son was buried. And a bunch
Because
of the
of the
family
virus.
was because of the virus, because there's no travel allowed. And another thing, when you talk about just be there and being held, she was there at his coffin, holding his hand and just crying. And again, someone came up to her and said, "You have to stop crying now."
Her is her daughter, by the way, for those of you
My
who aren't
daughter,
aware.
eldest daughter. And so this was her brother, her little brother. And she decided that she wasn't going to allow that shaming, and she just decided, inside herself, no. And she just continued to allow her grief to come out there with him, with his body there. And it literally gave permission to her siblings and half siblings who were there, the cousins that were there, to come together, and they literally got in a circle holding each other and cried. And that changed the experience for everyone there.
Mm.
It released that shame of being able to, of feeling like you have to hold your emotions in. And so showing up in a whole different way for people and giving them permission to emote can be incredibly healing.
I would like to lean into that too. It's beautiful that your daughter had that courage to say, no, fuck that. Like, this hurts. I'm going to feel this. I'm going to move this pain. And through that, give people the permission to feel as well. And one of the things I would love to highlight right here are like older traditions. They, like older cultures, they would have traditions of collectively coming together as a community to grieve the death of somebody, to grieve the loss of somebody. And there would be wailing and weeping and throwing dust on their head and wearing sackcloth and ashes as a way to symbolize and express the deep pain of this person's presence being gone.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe, just from our understanding of working through pain and trauma and how to release that from the body, if we have a healthy way of grieving, of allowing each of the steps of grief to move through us, to be welcome to move through us, we actually initiate our wholeness faster. It
Yes.
is when we suppress it and repress it that it stays stuck in there, and it turns into toxicity, which can manifest in any number of ways. Explosive behaviors, so it can just be weepy and depressive all the time. It could be rage, showing up as anger or violence. It can, or it can show up in physical dis-ease in the body, where emotional mental dis-ease within the body. And so it's really important when we are experiencing loss like this to not shame it, but to welcome it with love and understanding and give space for full expression.
Yes. And this is where it also, another thing that can be helpful, and looking back at the old traditions brought this up as well. Just allowing the person to share stories about their loved one. So much of the time people just, they want to avoid bringing up the loved one because, or they'll shut someone down when they start to share a story because they're uncomfortable that that person might start having some emotions, or they're not wanting to feel their own emotions, and they'll shut it down, and they'll change the subject. That's going to be very obvious to the person who was sharing the story. My friend that I spoke to you of before, who had also lost a son, she said, you know, if you would like to share some stories about your son, I would love to hear about him, get to know him. And that was beautiful. And in the old cultures, people wore some kind of significance that they had lost a loved one. Some cultures, they would wear black for an entire year afterwards. And then when people saw it, they would say, oh, who are you wearing this for? Tell me about them. And they would get to tell the stories. And in this way, their loved one stayed alive and with them more, and they got to tell and share and have the emotions, and it was a much healthier way of being. And now it's like when someone has like a wave of grief coming up a couple months later, again, they're labeled as they're not handling it very well, and grief comes in waves, and we can be doing okay, and then it out of nothing, you see a picture, or you have a thought, or you see something that reminds you of the person, and it just wells up, and you have to let that grief move through and be expressed, and it's okay to do that.
And there's no time limit on grief.
No.
I would say to a certain degree that pain will be felt for the rest of your life. And it's a sign of how much you loved that person. It's not a sign of being broken. It's a sign of what a huge impact that person made and what a special place they hold in your heart. 13 years later, my daughter still feels so alive and present to me because she made such an impact on my life in 57 days. So imagine someone who lives a life and then chooses to end it, how much more there is. And there will be a wide spectrum of emotions. Sometimes it will be joy, sometimes it'll be sadness, anger, denial. And we're going to talk about that next.
Yeah, the stages of grief, all the stages of grief come along, and they're seen and known to be shock and disbelief, the first stage, the denial, the bargaining, the guilt, the anger or rage, and with the incredible amount of healing and the tools that I have, I've been able to move through a lot of this, and I hadn't allowed that rage to come up and be expressed through me, and it literally showed up in my face by like this really big outbreak, an allergy reaction in my eyes, where they got like red and swollen and burning, and it's like my tears were like acid, they were burning so much. And then I looked at that psychosomatically, and it was the rage, and I realized that I had not allowed that emotion, that stage of the grieving, to come out around my son. And so I had to like consciously take the time and allow that to come out and be expressed. And it wasn't until after I had done that this was allowing this to clear up in my eyes. And like literally, it's like the tears were like acid of hate and rage and anger, you know? So consciously taking the time to allow that to come up. And when we look psychosomatically at what's coming up in our body, like the eyes are heart and solar plexus. So it's like that fire of emotion and the grief of the loss all coming out in my eyes. So this like the physical expression of the emotional stuff that was still in my body. And
you even pointed out how one of your eyes started coming down more. And for those of you that aren't
first
aware,
on the left side, which was the feminine side,
an emotional side. Yeah. So it's speaking to being weighed down by emotions.
mm-hmm.
I'm just giving a little more insight for people who are curious about psychosomatic therapy.
Well, and the outside corner of my right eye, the personality side, like as left is soul and right is personality, that started to actually angle down a little bit more too. So it was like that expression of my experience in this lifetime affecting how my features were showing up too. So yeah, there was that part as well. And so it's amazing how our experiences show up in our bodies, and when we're able to listen to them, they can give us clues of what it is that we need to do next for our own healing.
Mm-hmm. And on a psychosomatic note there, for people who aren't aware, grief is actually held in the lungs.
Mm-hmm.
So this can manifest in a lot of different ways. For me, it's shown up as tissue loss. I have a lot of tissue loss in my upper chest area. And that is speaking to grief, number one, but also not feeling like I had enough affection and emotional support. So if you're experiencing the loss of somebody or a deep pain and your body starts reacting in certain ways, please reach out. There's a reason behind it, and your body is trying to communicate.
Yes. And the messages of the body are incredibly powerful and can
and accurate.
Yes.
The body isn't lying. Like, we could tell ourselves we're fine, and the body's going to be like, no, there's something out of alignment.
Take a look right here. Yeah. The next stage, depression. It's just like that heaviness, that heavy depression. And I feel like that part of it, again, will be worse if we're not allowing the emotions to move through us. Because again, it's that depressing of the other emotions, not allowing.
Yeah.
And it's when we're actually able to get those emotions out and allow them to move through. The next stage is forgiveness. So there's the forgiveness that has to happen. The forgiveness is not going to happen if you don't allow the sadness and the grief and the rage and whatever is coming up, whether that's forgiveness for yourself, for other people, or even to the person who has died. So forgiveness is going to be huge, especially in cases where suicide is a factor.
Mm-hmm.
And
the forgiveness piece is going to be on multiple levels. It's
yes,
forgiving the person, and forgiving. It's a tricky word, right? Because forgiving means if somebody did something wrong, that's worth forgiving. So we're going to use this word with some liberty, because we don't believe Jared did something wrong by taking his life.
And there can still be anger.
Yeah. So it's
play, but there's the forgiveness of self and the forgiveness of other people, because of all of the, people. We want to know why. We want to know why. We want to put blame on something. We want to understand.
Yes.
And nothing's going to change anything. It's not. But the human mind wants to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that case, there's this really big temptation to put blame, and that can be including yourself.
And I would even venture to say that possibly a better option for a word here could be understanding. And from a Buddhist perspective, this is something I learned a while ago. they would say there's no reason to forgive anything. Once we take the time to understand a situation thoroughly, then we realize, oh, there's nothing to forgive. This was an expression of love or a bid for love. And so this forgiveness piece is really seeking to understand and find peace with it, which leads us to the acceptance.
Yeah, that's the next stage, the acceptance, which is huge. It's a huge thing and essential to the healing process, because again, if we're not able to accept what is, then we suffer, because suffering is a fighting against what is. So,
Right. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is an option. Like the pain of someone's death is very real. There isn't a way to avoid that. And I'm feeling hesitance even wanting to say this. And I ultimately believe it's true that the suffering is an option when we don't seek understanding and we choose to remain a victim of this person died, instead of seeking to understand where that person was coming from and make peace with that, we are choosing to carry on that suffering.
and
What do you feel about that, Freya?
in some ways, I get that, yes, because as I said, it's when we fight against what is, rather than coming to a place of acceptance for what is, and then moving into how we can like change the reality around us for those of us who are still here, because we don't want that pattern to continue and to play out again in other people. It's like when we don't learn the lesson from something, when we don't accept the sacrifice that someone made to teach us something and to change things for other people, because I really truly believe that my son's death is a big message to the family and the community of how we really, really need to honor people in their expression and just have that unconditional love and acceptance for who we are, and maybe question the social norms of what is perceived as valuable and productive in expression. Because he said to my daughter one time, he saw these ants running around and he said, "Ants are so dumb. They waste their whole lives working." And that's who he was. He valued connection. He was an artist with his music and everything else. And he was all about relationships and connecting with people. And we actually have so much to learn from him. But the way this world is, didn't see his expression as productive and valuable. And so we need to take that attention that he's drawn to this and change that. So that's how we can create that acceptance and not make it something that we suffer over for the rest of our lives, but rather take the value that he has taught us and change that for those of us who are still here. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And it takes us to our next piece, where we want to talk about how to transmute pain like this. How do we take this and turn it into something gold? Like as one of our mentors would say, where do we find the diamonds in the dog shit? And one of the things that Freya and I and Mika as well, something that we've been discussing is this rise of the feminine energy and this maternal instinct, and I would even say maternal wrath. and fury that's just like, enough is enough. I'm sick of my children being this and that. I'm sick of the earth being taken advantage of. I'm sick of this pain. I'm sick of this injustice. And now it's like the rise of the feminine, that mother hen anger that's just like, I'm going to protect my own. Mm-hmm. And so through this, Freya, do you want to lean into what has that energy felt like?
It's that righteous anger of why do we need to, like, why is the world showing up this way? Like, you know, we know why, because of, you know, dominator culture and everything that has been taught, and it's time to change that. And it's like, no fucking more. We're not doing this anymore. It's not working. We have to change this. The survival of our species on the planet depends on it. We have to do something different. And for me, I am not willing to allow the sacrifice that my son made to teach us something better, to go unnoticed, to go unreconciled, to not be appreciated. And we literally have to change this. We do. And so it's creating a world where our children feel safe to express the true nature of their souls, to be fully expressed, to have that beauty and that joy, and have their gifts appreciated, not have this is what you must do. You must have a job like this, rather than expressing their creativity and bringing their gifts to the world another way. It's like there's this list of what you must do to be acceptable, to be productive, to be right, to
be effective, to fit in, blah blah.
To fit in, yeah. To fit in, yes. And to just appreciate our children, teach them that their own beautiful, joyful expression, whatever that looks like, is okay. And that it's actually appreciated and loved and perfect. And when we bring that energy to the way we're showing up, it's going to change everything. And it's just about meeting people in love right where they're at. And when they are in pain and they're suffering, it's like, how can I show up in support of you? Or, you know, creating a place where it's safe for them to share where they're feeling without judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's just so fucking much judgment. We have to release that.
Release the authenticity.
What was that, Mika?
Yeah, just release the authenticity. This is the clash between the partnership culture that values creativity and life, and the dominator culture which values destruction and death. And they are incompatible. They are completely incompatible with each other, and that's why there's so much chaos right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of chaos. There's this. The patriarchy does not want to let go.
I feel like a very practical step for those who are tuning in right now, of one of the ways that we can create a world where authentic expression is welcome, is allowing our children to have temper tantrums. This is step one in removing the shame around expressing emotion. So for children whose neocortex isn't fully online yet, okay, their rational brain is not fully functioning. So expecting your child to act like a rational human being doesn't work. So allowing your child to express what they're feeling in that moment allows them to come back to homeostasis, and it teaches them healthy ways to express their emotions, and it cultivates understanding. So something that one of my sisters does with her children, who likes to have temper tantrums like every child does. She allows the temper tantrum, and then will also be speaking to her and saying things like, I understand you're upset about this and that, and right now you're expressing your emotions. When you are done, would you like to tell me what you would like right now? And so there's no shaming the child for feeling those emotions or having that temper tantrum. And it's also letting them understand, if you want something, you have to ask for it. You have to actually put words to what you're wanting. So this is a very basic step. Allow your children to have temper tantrums, and learn from them, emulate them.
Yeah.
And in a safe
And we
space,
can
like
do
maybe
this
not in the grocery store.
Yeah, we can do this in a way that, and this is so much of what the releasing of trauma, and it's essential that we each do the work to heal and release our own trauma and stored emotions and all of that. It's doing this work that is going to shift that, and allowing our children to have those temper tantrums. Like our little boy who's 6, and he is so much the same energy that Jared was when he was little. And he is allowed to go into his room and have his little emotional breakdown of whatever is going on. And we'll even give him words, like as he was growing up, when he's like 3 and 4, we're like, oh, it looks like you're feeling this right now. It's okay to feel that. And then the next time he might go in his room and have his little meltdown or whatever, and he knows that he has a safe place. He can go do that, and it's okay. And then he comes and he goes, I was just feeling frustrated about this. And he can put words to it now because we've given him
Which
words
is huge.
for his emotions.
To be able to name his emotions is huge.
And he is so much more grounded and secure, and all of these things than my other son was ever allowed to be in the environment that we were in at that time. And so,
well, and it's like I picked up on one thing you said, Kelly, when you said he's not a rational.
You want to bring your face into the screen so we can see you?
Yeah. I picked up on what you were saying about that, because we aren't just rational. We're also emotional. But we shame our children out of their emotional selves into only being rational selves, and that is unbalanced. That's imbalanced. And so it's so important to not only not shame them, but to honor it. And I don't even like to call it a temper tantrum. And I liked Freya's wording, his little temper tantrum, but there's nothing little about them.
He's all big personality.
So much fury in that little body, but he releases it, and then he comes out and he's just full of love.
Yeah.
He's released everything. He doesn't carry a grudge. He doesn't continue to be bothered by this emotion that came up in him, because he's released it. And
he doesn't hold shame around it.
So much more balanced and healthier than 99% of adults.
And you highlighted a truth that I want to highlight for our audience as well. Oh wait, I think you're talking and I can't hear you.
No, you're looking at the Facebook feed. It's delayed.
Oh. You landed on a truth that is so solid that I want people to hear it again. After, you mentioned that he's like this little ball of energy with so much fury, and then he goes and he releases it and he comes back to love. And this is where we want people to come back to, is the love that we are. And so I want, when an emotion like rage comes up, instead of shaming it and trying to stuff it away or get rid of it, stay curious with it. What is under that rage? What's under the anger? What's under the jealousy? What's under the disappointment? Leaning into these with curiosity, and then working on interacting with the piece that is actually out of alignment.
Yes, and this is again listening to our bodies. It's like, okay, so where are you feeling the rage right now? And really going into your body and finding what's underneath that rage in the body. And then that will let us know, it'll make us aware of where we still have some healing to do and some releasing to do. And that those messages from the body are always 100% right on point.
And would you say, Freya, just out of curiosity's sake, it was your left eye that was more swollen, correct? So this is like feminine emotion. Would you say that you hadn't fully expressed that rage from your mother bear heart over your son's death?
Exactly. Over my son's death and everything that led up to it. From the time
so the demonization and the wrong making of emotions is killing people. Literally, it is killing people.
It is
killing our society.
We need to express them.
Yes, 100%. I would like to, at this point, open things up to any questions if people have them, either typed into the Facebook feed or here on the call. I would like to open that up. Can you unmute people, Michael?
Well, nobody's indicated a desire.
Yeah, so if anyone who's on the Zoom call here has a question, you can either type it into the chat or unmute yourself and ask the question. And if nobody has questions at this point, I'm feeling pretty complete with this really powerful discussion, conversation. Okay, I feel like we're good here. Is there anything else that you wanted to address or bring up, Kelly or Mika?
I feel really complete. Thank you, Freya, for your vulnerable share right now and speaking into a topic that's really alive for you and really alive for this world. And your vulnerability and your heart forwardness is deeply appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us for this really important conversation. It's essential that we shift what's going on in this planet right now.
Yeah, finish.
Okay, thank you for everyone who has shown up and is watching this, and also for anyone who will watch this in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much.